Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us today. Excuse me, my name is Dr. Tashina Rita, and I am thankful that you've decided to take some time out to join us for today's presentation. Today's presentation is entitled HIV Cure Research in Philadelphia. And so we're excited to have a discussion with you around this topic matter. But before we jump into today's conversation, let me give you a few reminders of what to expect throughout this presentation. The chat box has been disabled. However, you can ask all of your questions in the Q&A box. At the end of the presentation, we will answer all of your questions by the presenters. Also, at the end of the presentation, before we close out, you will be prompted to complete a survey. So don't log off, just hold tight. When we end it, you will be prompted to complete a survey. We want to hear from you for you to share your feedback about your experience in today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this presentation over to Dr. Montaner.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this discussion this morning. My name is Luis Montaner. I'm at the Wistar Institute in Philadelphia, and I also have the honor to co-lead one of the largest cure efforts in the United States, based here in Philadelphia. This morning, we are fortunate to be joined by several members that are going to be discussing some information with you this morning. So I will briefly let them introduce themselves before we get started. First, Dr. Tebas.
Let me unmute myself. I'm Pablo Tebas. I am the principal investigator of the AIDS clinical trial unit at the University of Pennsylvania. We have been collaborating with Luis and with BEAT-HIV for many years now, several projects in previous iterations of the interferon studies, and now in combination with broadly neutralizing antibodies. And we're very excited to be part of this collaborative, and we're very excited to present the studies that are coming this year to our community. And we are very thankful of the collaboration of the community and the involvement of the community in these projects that has been critical for the success of them.
Thank you. Ken, Lynn, introduce yourself. We cannot see you.
Hi, everyone. Yes. Okay. My name is Ken, and I am the community liaison for BEAT-HIV. And in addition, I am the person in charge of operations here at the University of Pennsylvania. So I get to interact with a lot of folks and explain the projects involved with HIV and what they can expect as far as their experience when they interact with the health system associated with this. So hopefully I've met many of the folks that are watching this discussion. So this isn't the first time we spoke before. I also teach a class as part of Project Teach at Philadelphia Fight. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion today and answering any questions or correcting any misconceptions that may be out there about HIV cure research.
Thank you. And Will Carter, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm William Carter. I am a person actually living with HIV. I have been a community activist for the last, let's say, 10 years, and I joined the BEAT-HIV Collaboratory about 2 years ago, and in the 2 years, I have since become the chairman of our Consumer Advisory Board. And through Philadelphia's fights and their training classes, that's where I got my start from. learning about HIV and how it does me, and how to effectively help the community.
Thank you. So hopefully you'll see that we have a really excellent panel that will share with you a lot of different insights on cure-related research from different perspectives. So it's on the clinical, the community, and the participant trial management experience. I also want to acknowledge Beth Peterson, the program director for our BEAT-HIV, who will be running the slides for us this morning. So Beth, the next slide, please. So what we prepared for you this morning is an introduction of some of the leading pieces of information about our cure effort, basically what are we trying to achieve. And then Dr. Tebas will review with you some of the ongoing studies that are active here in Philadelphia. Some of them are still recruiting participants. Then Lynn will review with you a topic of high community interest, which is what to expect during an analytical treatment interruption. What have we learned about it and how do we monitor it? And lastly, Will Carter will share with us a participant perspective, as well as describe the community engagement activities that we have underway to hopefully illustrate how this is really a team effort between science and community to move the cure agenda forward. Next slide. So this effort is not has not emerged overnight. We have been engaged with our community in understanding HIV disease, as well as processes of HIV cure initiatives for a long time. And I should say that this slide is particularly focused on the interaction between our program at Wistar and Philadelphia Fight, but Pablo Tebas has been engaged in HIV research for even longer and brings the whole experience of Penn that is not reflected in this slide. But the point is to illustrate the fact that we have been in communication with the community for all throughout this period, and this has resulted in multiple publications that have gained and provided information to the world about HIV cure and HIV disease. And also the participants that have contributed to the studies have been provided data that has actually allowed for other trials to be pursued, some of them in sub-Saharan Africa and in Vietnam, as well as elsewhere in the US. So to show that we're really part of a continuum of information and discovery that is, even though based in Philadelphia, its impact goes well beyond Philadelphia. And what we're going to talk about is the most recent 5-year effort on cure that allows us to move our science forward to even higher height of impact. Next slide. So I think a reasonable question, I think, in 2021 is, why do we pursue a cure? As you know, antiretroviral therapy continues to be developed and improved, and there is now the prospect of even long-term antiretroviral therapy and other strategies. So I think a reasonable question is, do we need to find a cure? And I think that the overall question is yes. And the reasons that that the cure is still a priority is, I think, primarily the reality that HIV diagnosis continues to be stigmatized in the community, and even through criminalization laws in the US still, and that there is still an uncertainty of health outcomes and health management after long-term antiretroviral therapy. And obviously the burden of antiretroviral therapy for life is one that should not be understated. Issues of access to antiretroviral therapy from a global perspective, or cost relative to maintaining access to therapy, are obviously part of this concern as well. But I think invariably, most of the advancements and recruitments that have come to trials come from really a desire of people to contribute to the answer, to provide the opportunity for discovery, because most individuals that are living with HIV recognize that the treatments that they have now were because people stepped up to test these drugs in the past when it was uncertain what the benefit would be. So I think the same spirit is present today in that people participate in cure trials with the hope that their participation can open up new opportunities for people in the future. Next slide. So I think it's invariably, I think there is no cure to HIV that is available to the community or people living with HIV today. However, there have been several reports of individual persons that have experienced what we would otherwise would hope to develop as a cure, which is the absence of replicating virus and the fact that they don't require antiretroviral therapy without any detrimental outcome to them, in spite of the fact that they were previously infected. And these individuals are really important to the field because they signify the potential to achieve a cure, even though their particular histories do not provide a strategy for most people. They do provide a goal that it is possible to achieve a cure. So I won't go through the history of each one of them, but suffice it to say that the purpose of this slide is to emphasize that there is no cure at the present time. However, there are indications that it is possible to achieve a cure. Next slide. The objective of our team in Philadelphia is really to develop and test strategies towards eradication, which is the word that we use for the absence of HIV in the body, or induce a permanent state of suppression, which would mean that you would maintain an undetectable viral load in the absence of antiretroviral therapy. So this is kind of like what we want to achieve. Next slide. And we do that in 4 specific objectives. The first one is we want to understand where the virus is hiding and how much of it is there. The second is what type of response on a person could reduce the amount of virus, and what features does the virus has that we could exploit in trying to get rid of it. Third is what Dr. Tebas will discuss, which is what can we do to test strategies that are not based on antiretroviral therapy, but based on using your own immune system to get rid of the virus. And also, as we mentioned, how do we engage a dialogue with the community that supports our trials and supports what should be the priorities of research moving forward. Next slide. One cartoon that we generated earlier on to kind of highlight these objectives is here, which is the first one is kind of like, again, how to find the virus and how much there is. The second is how to empower or identify the features of the immune system that are able to strengthen your response to control the virus. And the third is what can we provide to therapeutically to an individual so that they could have a much more powerful response to get rid of the virus, perhaps even giving them opportunities for types of responses that are not natural, but can be provided by a therapy like gene therapy, for example, that we'll talk about. Pablo Tebas will talk about the trial that addresses that. So next slide. So as far as background, let's talk about where the virus hides. Next slide, because a concept that I think most individuals living with HIV understand is that there is a persistent amount of virus that a person will retain in spite of successful antiretroviral therapy. Here is kind of like a dam where the wall is the antiretroviral therapy in a way, and the water behind it is the amount of virus that still remains. And even though you can halt it, you cannot get rid of it. So why is that? Next slide. So I think there are basically a couple of concepts that are driving our ideas. The first is that a cell that has virus in its DNA, meaning that it's an infected cell, here reflected by this sort of DNA, blue DNA that you see here, that when the cell expresses HIV, that in itself will provide a death signal to the cell, which means that if we can express the virus, the cell that expresses it will eventually die. So this would predict that if you could, in theory, make all the cells express virus, then all the virus would burn itself out in the system. However, we cannot achieve that, next slide, because we've learned that in spite of this activation reflected here in the orange cell, there is a second population of cells that are not dying and that are remaining stably infected. And they can remain in that sort of condition for a long time. And we refer to that as a resting state, resting because the virus is not being expressed. So therefore we have the active, which is expected to die, and the non-active or resting, which we would refer to as the reservoir, or the amount of virus that we need to try to flush out or identify or reduce. Next slide. Now, this particular status we have learned a lot about, and we know where it primarily resides, and we think resides in CD4 cells. We know that it will be persistent in individuals right after they start antiretroviral therapy. And we know that it is stable, that it doesn't seem to decrease after antiretroviral therapy to a point that you can just wait it out and wait till it goes away. And we know that because once an individual stops antiretroviral therapy, the virus can return. Next slide. We also know that this particular infected resting cell can reside in multiple organs as well. So even though most studies will evaluate the amount of virus in the blood, because we can take a blood sample, we know that the blood is not the only place that the virus will be present. So we hope to see reductions in the blood to be reflecting what is happening in the rest of the body, but we recognize the limitation that we don't know for sure the decay or the reduction that will happen in a person, even if we monitor the blood, which is the reason why some trials will also collect rectal biopsies, taking a biopsy from the rectal tissue inside to kind of get a window of a tissue beyond the blood. And that is also the reason why treatment interruptions become the most confident strategy for us to see what virus remains, because at that point we expect the virus is coming from everywhere in the body, not just the blood. Next slide. And I think that we here in Philadelphia have led criteria by which to evaluate the impact of trials and the design of the trials that has provided a guideline or a roadmap, if you like, as to how to evaluate the amount of virus in cure-directed trials. And this is now providing some guidance for all trials, not just in Philadelphia, but everywhere in the world. So with that introductory comment, I will transition now the talk to Dr. Tebas, who will describe some of the ongoing research questions and opportunities for participation that are active here in Philadelphia. Dr. Tebas?
Sure, thank you, Luis. I just want to make sure that to see, can you see this thing that I'm writing on the screen? Or I am the only person that I see it? I'm probably
no, we can see it.
No,
we can see it.
We can see it.
We can see the little squiggly lines, the red squiggly lines that you just put.
Okay. So one of the first, I hope, well, let me erase this. Maybe it will be easier if I use sort of a pointer. Can you see the arrow now?
No, I cannot see the arrow. I did see the squiggly lines.
Mouse?
The mouse? Yes, we can see the mouse. We can see the arrow now.
Is the black arrow?
Yes, we can see the arrow.
Oh, let me just do it.
That's my arrow.
Oh, really? Sorry.
So the black arrow is your arrow. Let me just draw. Okay, let's start and not get too fixated on this. So, no. Oh,
there's a red dot there.
Whose red dot is that?
Well, Beth is running the the share and the slides, Pablo. So your screen is not the same as
Yeah, no, I know.
on the
It's a little
screen.
bit complicated.
I
So
think
the first question that we want to ask in our trials is, can we decrease the HIV that is persistent, the reservoir that Luis was talking about with the in the picture, while patients are on antiretroviral therapy by activated innate immune responses in combination with BNAbs. So the immune system has three big branches. It has the humoral, which is basically the antibody response against infections or other pathogens. You have the cellular immune response, the T cells, the cells that are infected by HIV, so that are so important in controlling infections. And it has an innate section of the immune system. So in this study, we're combining interventions that will boost the innate immune response against the HIV virus in combination with broadly neutralizing antibodies, which is part of the humoral response. Next slide. These are the goals of the study. And in this study, I think it's better to show the schema, but we're combining PEG-intron, so PEG interferon, which is a booster of the innate immune system, with a combination of two broadly neutralizing antibodies, 3BNC 117 and 101074, two antibodies against the HIV virus. And then we have immunological and virological goals, but the main goal of the study is safety, but we want to see if we can control the virus by immunological mechanisms and prevent the viral rebound. Next slide. And I think I had to erase the wiggles because if I don't do it, they stick. Is that right? Were you able to see my handwriting?
yeah, we can. And I'm kind of perplexed. I thought that the sharing by Beth would preclude you from showing anything. So this is new to me.
Okay. So this is the study that we're conducting now that we have we have enrolled already 14 more than 14 people. We are enrolling people with HIV that are well-controlled HIV, living with HIV, that have undetectable viral loads for at least 6 months, and a CD4 count greater than 450 in these two cohorts. And the first cohort has 14 people, and the second cohort has 7 people. Initially, we were thinking in randomizing people, but we have enrolled them sequentially. So the first cohort, the 14 people, has already been enrolled, and we are presently enrolling the second cohort. And what we do is and here you have our interventions, the broadly neutralizing antibodies and the interferon. So first we start with interferon for 4 weeks during step 2, and then we add the broadly neutralizing antibodies. So the interferon boosts the innate immune response, and the broadly neutralizing antibody is the humoral part of it. So we do it in the presence of antiretroviral therapy for 4 weeks. Then participants transition to a step where we stop the antiretroviral therapies, an ATI. We monitor them very closely. We inject interferon every week and the antibodies every 4 weeks for a total of 24 weeks. And then we stop everything. We stop the antibody infusions, and we stop also the administration of interferon, and we follow the participants in a pure ATI. There is nothing in the system. And we want to see if what we have done during this step 3 prevents the virus from rebounding when there is no intervention at the same time. We're also interested in to see if we can control viral replication during this step. We have not done a formal analysis, but most of the people that have received the intervention are already in this phase, and almost everybody is controlling the HIV virus during this period of time. We have very few people in step 4, so we are not able to tell you at this point if it's going to control, and what proportion of people will control the virus in absence of any intervention. If anybody rebounds, For 4 weeks or more than 1,000 copies. Everybody restarts antiretroviral therapy. And we have a few participants that are in this stage now that have resuppressed the virus.
Pablo?
Yes?
There is a question about defining what is an ATI.
ATI is an analytical treatment interruption. It means that we stop the HIV medicines during that time, and we monitor the patients very closely. I think there is another section of the talk that we talk in more detail about analytical treatment interruptions. But basically, it's stopping antiretroviral therapy to see if what we have done to the immune system, or with the intervention that we have done, or with the broadly neutralizing antibodies, if we can control the virus. It's the only mechanism that we have now to evaluate the interventions, because we don't know what is going to protect people from, what is going to make the immune system control the HIV virus during the stopping therapy. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Oh, I shouldn't be writing too much because I have to erase. It keeps staying. Huh. It's painful. Okay, we'll write one time only. Okay, so this is where we are now with the study. In orange are things that have already happened, and in red, in a more clear color, there are things that are still ongoing. As you can see, most of the people are at some point during the analytical treatment interruption. 3 participants went to step 5. They restarted antiretroviral therapy, as you can see here, and they have reached an undetectable viral load after restarting therapy. Okay, next slide. This is a second study that we are doing that is related to the parent study, and is more a general question of how we monitor people during analytical treatment interruptions, because we need to monitor them very closely to see when the viral rebounds happen, and also because viral rebound is associated with problems, and we only allow people to have a viral rebound for a certain period of time. And because of the COVID pandemic, it would be nice to be able to monitor people closely without having to come to Penn, park at Penn, which is a nightmare, and to have a real-time monitoring of the viral load at their home. And this is a collaboration between Wistar, Merck, and also the manufacturer of this device. This device is put on the arm of the patient at home, and it collects, this is the device at home. It collects 4 drops of blood here, and they are put in a filter paper, and they get dried, and we can extract the DNA and the RNA from those samples and calculate the viral load and do other tests in these specimens. So we have been doing this for a little bit, and you will have a demonstration in subsequent presentation about this device and what are our goals. Next slide. If we are able to monitor people at home, it will be much easier to do this very complicated study, and it will expand the population that can be participate in this trial, because it will not require them to come to Penn so frequently. The next question is, can we target the HIV reservoir? In the previous study, we were using the innate immune system and the humoral. The third component of the immune system is the cellular component, and can we engineer cellular effector cells that will target the HIV reservoir? And the next slide shows a study that we did and we published this year, that we proved that cells that have been treated with gene therapy. We collect cells from the patients. We remove them the co-receptor for HIV, doing something similar to what it was done to the Berlin patient. The Berlin patient received a bone marrow transplant from somebody that didn't have the co-receptor that HIV uses to go inside the cell, the CCR5. So what we did is, because that's complicated and is associated with problems with a bone marrow transplant, what we did is collect blood from the participants, remove the co-receptor and infuse those cells back into the patient. And this is a study that was completed and we presented this year. And in this figure, what we show is that some of the patients control the virus for a long time during the analytical treatment interruption, and we're able to maintain a low level viremia. Obviously, this is not the solution because we would like to be able to maintain suppression, but it's a proof of concept that by engineering these cells that are resistant to HIV, you are able to control to some degree the rebound of viremia. And as it happens with antiretroviral therapy, we're going to have to use combinations of approaches. So combining a cellular approach like this one in the slide with a humoral and the innate immunity, we might be able to control and suppress the HIV virus in the absence of antiretroviral therapy. So that's one of the future studies that we're planning for in subsequent years. Next slide. This is a schema of the trial that we are doing right now, given CAR T cells to individuals. CAR T cells are cells that CD4 cells that have been engineered to target specifically HIV infected cells. And this study, we have enrolled 8 people, 7 people of the 12 people that we're planning to enroll in this study. And it's a very similar design to the interferon study that we presented before. So people are screened. During that screening period, we collect cells from the participants. We modify the cells in the laboratory, and we give the cells back to the patients on step 2. And then we do an analytical treatment interruption. And in this situation, the participant is only having the CAR T cells that we have infused back into the patients. And we want to see if they can control HIV replication during that step 3. And if the virus rebound, then we put the patients back after 16 weeks into back to antiretroviral therapy, and we follow the patients over time. So we want to see if we can engineer a cellular response against HIV to control the virus in the absence of antiretroviral therapy. Next slide. Other questions that we're asking outside of the Delaney collaboratory is, can we use monoclonal antibodies in cure research? As you know, monoclonal antibodies are a hot area in HIV and in other areas. We use them, for example, to treat COVID. Nowadays are the only drugs that are approved to treat COVID in the outpatient setting, and we use them in hundreds of people right now to treat COVID. There are antibodies also against HIV that we are trying to use in cure research. Next slide. And these are part of the projects that we're doing in the AIDS clinical trial group. So antibodies are these molecules that have these different regions that are important for their activity. This part of the antibody is called the variable region, is what it binds to HIV protein or to the COVID protein. And that's what mediates the specificity of the antibody. And these are part of the rest of the structure of the antibody that can be modified to change their half-life, so how long they persist in the system. And this is the molecules of the part of our response. This is what we make against infections or any antigen that we are exposed to. And the question that we're trying to ask is, can we use these antibodies in cure interventions, in studies that are evaluating strategies for controlling the HIV in the absence of therapy? Next slide. So We have been using antibodies to treat infectious diseases for hundreds of years. If you are of a certain age, like me, you may remember this movie from the 90s. It tells the story of Balto, the dog that it was the lead dog in a sledge in Alaska that was carrying diphtheria serum to treat kids in an epidemic that was in Nome, Alaska. The dog was delivering antibodies to treat children with a diphtheria, an infection. And this is the statue of this dog in Central Park in New York. It was the lead dog in the last relay of this in 1924 when this happened. So we have been using antibodies for 100 years, more than 100 years, to treat infectious diseases. When antibiotics were discovered by Alexander Fleming, it came out of flavor, and now antibodies are coming back in every therapeutic arena of medicine, including treatment of cancer, the treatment of rheumatologic diseases, and the treatment of infectious diseases. Next slide. So you have here rituximab. This is a well-known antibody that we use to treat leukemias and to treat rheumatological disease. The variable region of the antibody targets this protein in the surface of the B cells, CD20, and it binds to them and eliminates the cells or targets the cell in other diseases, or blocks a particular cytokine that the immune cells are producing. Rituximab is one example, but there are many other examples of monoclonal antibodies being used in the therapeutic setting in medicine. Next slide. So now we have new methods to collect antibodies. These antibodies have been made by humans. So humans make antibodies when they get exposed to an infection or a tumor or some other antigen. And so B cells get differentiated into plasma cells, but you can collect those precursors. You can collect those B cells or plasma cells and isolate them, connecting the patient to a leukapheresis. And then you can select the cells that you are interested, the antibodies that you like because they have some particular properties. And this process that has been in place for a while, but has been really quickly expanded, is the process that we follow to isolate monoclonal antibodies to treat infectious diseases, cancers, and rheumatological diseases. Now the selection can be done in mice, humanized mice. You can select the same cells, and there are companies, entire companies that are based on this technology, like Regeneron. And this is the technology that has been used to develop the antibodies to treat COVID infection that has been developed in less than a year, and there have been in hundreds of thousands of people already. Next slide. The antibodies, the monoclonal antibodies that we use to treat infection, HIV infection, bind to this protein on the surface of the virus, and basically binds in different regions of this protein. This is similar to the spike. So this is the protein that the virus, which is a ball, has these spikes sticking out of the ball that the virus uses to bind to the cell and enter the cell. So these monoclonal antibodies bind to different regions of this molecule. And you have already here, because we are using this in the BEAT study, CD4 binding antibodies, and then B3 steam binding antibodies. So when you combine the antibodies binding to these two different regions of this molecule in the virus, you prevent the virus from infected cells. And that's why we're using these molecules now in the BEAT study and other studies that are targeting the cure. Next slide. So how are we going to use monoclonal antibodies in the treatment of HIV? You can use monoclonal antibodies as prophylaxis. So you can give them monoclonal antibodies to people that have not been infected with HIV. And when you have the antibodies in the circulation, you will prevent HIV infection. It's like PrEP for HIV, with the difference that you might need an injection every 3 months, or you can modify the antibodies. It can have a very long half-life. You might need an injection every 6 months. So this is an area of active research in the vaccine trials network. You can use them as maintenance therapy. So you can Somebody that is suppressed on HIV, instead of having to take pills every day, you might infuse the antibodies, and because they have a very long half-life, you can prevent them to need to be treated every day, taking pills every day, because the antibodies might need injections every 2 months or every 3 months, and now they are making modifications that may be even longer than that. So as a maintenance therapy, and we are doing studies testing that. And then we can use the antibodies in the strategies for prolonged remission or cure of HIV, because besides controlling the virus, the antibodies can bind to cells that are infected with HIV and target them for elimination by antibody cellular dependency, cytotoxicity, or by NK cells. Next slide. This is one of the studies that we are doing at Penn right now that are giving the antibodies, combined broadly neutralizing antibodies in combination with an IL-15 superagonist. The IL-15 superagonist, what it does is reactivates the reservoir. That reservoir that sits inside the cells quiet, when you give them this molecule, it starts expressing proteins. So those cells now can be identified by the broadly neutralizing antibody and be targeted for elimination. In this study, we are giving the IL-15 superagonist with or without antibodies. And then after a year of suppression, we will do an analytical treatment interruption if this strategy has been able to target the reservoir for elimination. The study is open, and we are ready to enroll participants in this study. It's a study that is being done in the CTG all over the country. Next slide. Another study that we're doing is evaluating these antibodies as a strategy for maintenance. Can you maintain suppression in the absence of antiretroviral therapy if you give the antibodies? In this study, we're using similar antibodies that were the same antibodies, but instead of being short-acting, they are long-acting. So patients on antiretroviral therapy would get one infusion of these antibodies and then not take any pills for 24 weeks, because the antibodies will be in their system for 24 weeks, and we hope they will be able to maintain suppression. That's a study that will open this fall in our unit. Next slide. Luis, this is a section that I know.
No, we're good. Thank you very much, Pablo, for that summary. So hopefully everyone in the audience has seen the breadth of opportunities that are available here to get engaged in cure research. As Pablo noted, all the dominant themes that are being raised as priorities for cure are being tested here in Philadelphia. The use of novel antibodies that can detect an infected cell with efficiency across many people, the tools that are available to stimulate the immune system with the expectation that a reduction in virus will be observed, and the gene therapy approaches that have been associated with cures for lymphomas are being now used directed against the infected cell itself. So I think that the ongoing activity here in Philadelphia all point to significant contributions in the near future. So if you're interested, please reach out, because there are open recruitment efforts underway for several of these studies. So we will transition now to Ken, who will perhaps share with us some of the information about analytical treatment interruptions, which are a component of most cure-directed studies, as well as share his insights on participants' reactions to this particular sequence of a study design. Ken?
Okay, everybody. Believe it or not, we have been talking for 45 minutes. So I invite everyone to step up, shake it out, and let's talk about HIV Cure Research in Philadelphia. We are lucky enough to have Philadelphia to be a hotspot for HIV research. And although the clinical operations happen here in Philadelphia, and many of our folks have participated, the learning, the science is happening around the world. We have partnered with scientific institutions throughout the United States, Latin America, Europe, Canada, and beyond. So while the specimen and the participation happens here, a little bit of piece of our participants get to go around the world free of charge and be part of the movement to move us one step closer to a cure for HIV. So if you walk away from today's talk with one nugget, the nugget should be there are very dedicated, smart people in Philadelphia and around the world who wake up every day and their main focus is, how do we move one step closer to a cure for HIV? So if anyone, whether it's a client of someone who is listening in as a social worker or a case manager, or you are the patient themselves, have hope for that. We have not forgotten, and we don't underestimate how this disease impacts all aspects of people's lives. And it's from that we get motivated and we get up every day to start this work. Okay, I wanted to frame it that way. So it's an exciting time where we are trying to see what an individual has as far as their reservoir, their deep HIV within the body. While you're undetectable in the bloodstream, there's these sneaky little viruses with glasses and a hat mixing with all the other healthy cells. And they are what Dr. Montaner referred to as the latent cells. These cells sit and wait for the opportunity to activate and express HIV, and forcing the host, or in our case, the patient, to become viremic once again. So the only way we're going to cure HIV is if we get to touch and eliminate those latent sleeper cells. So there are a couple approaches going forward. We're using the interferon and the antibodies. And the gene therapy is taking the cell out of the person through an apheresis, which is a fancy blood collection. You know, we throw words around and we don't always define them. But an apheresis is a fancy blood collection that allows people the opportunity to have blood taken. Now, as part of any cure trial, there is going to be what they call an ATI. Again, let's define that. ATI, analytical treatment interruption. Fancy words. It means that your traditional HIV medications, the ones you take by mouth now and maybe in the future through injection, are held. And I know that this is a very difficult concept to grasp because we have drilled it into our community, the people who are impacted by HIV. Take your meds, take your meds, take your meds. But these we're asking people to do is to take a stop in a very closely monitored environment in order for us to evaluate our strategy. If we don't stop the meds, then we don't know how successful one of our strategies may have been. So the point of my talk today is to talk about the risks associated with ATIs or stopping your traditional medicines, who in the patients that we have would be best suited to consider this, what monitoring or safety protocols are put into place so that if someone chooses an ATI, how are we ensuring the patient's safety while they help us gain knowledge? Because safety is the number one issue with any research like this, and the gaining of knowledge is a far number two. Go back one more. I have one more point. Okay. And then we talk about through these, we have set situations where a person would be asked to stop their ATI, stop the hold of their traditional meds and restart. And then we monitor their reinitiation back to their base, that their viral load goes down to undetectable and their CD4 goes up and remain strong. Next slide. Okay, so it can be very stressful to think about this because you're letting go of a lifeline that you had for many years for some of us, and you need to have confidence in the team that you're working with. So it's very important to build a relationship with your research team so that they can monitor your health and well-being. And this is a good point to mention that when you're in a study like this, you are not turning your care over to the study team, but rather inviting the study team into your existing management of care. So your normal infectious disease doctor or nurse practitioner still remains in the driver's seat of your healthcare. We're simply involved in the little slice that would involve the research. And then the other issue that could be stressful during the ATI is we're all very familiar with undetectable is untransmittable. Well, during an ATI or a stopping of your traditional meds, there is the risk that you become detectable, which therefore means if you have unprotected sex, you now can transfer the virus to a seronegative individual. Next slide. Okay, so we're watching for things with if the virus were to return in an acute way. Things such as fever, fatigue, weight loss, night sweats, all the standard culprits. Now, do you see any relation to a current disease that's out there that some of them share these same things? So now we interject into the world of COVID and what that does to complicate someone considering an ATI, because it's going to be the team monitoring you very closely that will ensure that you are not experiencing COVID versus something associated with the ATI. So again, it's important to trust and build a relationship with your research team, and they will take care of you and monitor you closely, from the nurses to the doctors to the lab tests, many people watching after you. Next slide. Okay, so we are evaluating it from a lab standpoint. When it says immunological, it's looking for lab results. So that if we see something that is shifting the risk or making it unsafe for someone to continue, we are taking frequent labs and frequent vital signs and looking at the individual from testing standpoints in many different ways to ensure that the ATI is not causing any permanent harm. Now, there is a very small but present risk that once you stop your meds as directed and go on an ATI, that you could, when you are then returned to your HIV regimen, your traditional meds, that those meds may need to be changed. It's scientifically possible. However, I can say in our little part of the world, in the 100 of people or more that have undergone an ATI between Philadelphia Fight's research team and my research team here in the University of Pennsylvania, we have not had someone have to change their meds. So they were able to stop their existing regimen of HIV medications, participate in a treatment interruption, and then return to their already existing drugs. Theoretically, that could not happen, but it has not happened to date. Next screen.
So Ken, if you can maybe sort of come to a close soon to leave Will enough time, because as
Sure.
you indicated,
Okay.
I think
So,
both I and Pablo maybe used more time than we should have.
No problems. So people who would be eligible for an ATI, we're looking for basically the headline would be someone who's doing well, someone with a strong CD4 defined as greater than 450, someone who started care with a CD4 that was greater than 200. We don't want someone with a history of starting care very late. Comorbidity or other diseases. We try to stay away from hepatitis B, hepatitis C, uncontrolled diabetes, cancer, all these things. If you're already fighting other wars within your body, then an ATI might not be ideal for you, and you probably would not be eligible. Next screen. Okay, so we are monitoring folks very closely. In some cases, during the ATI weekly, we are getting viral loads and CD4s to ensure that the person is safe and that their CD4 is stable. So if someone participates in an ATI, they get a huge amount of following, a huge amount of labs. They receive compensation for their time and travel to participate. So we never want anyone to come out of pocket to join us. And they are helping us change the world. So the ATIs are necessary in order to evaluate whether a strategy or an idea we had the intended effect that we had theorized it would. So it's mandatory. It is not for everyone, but it can be done safely and has been done with over 100 people in my 10 plus years of working with ATIs. If someone wants to talk any further about this, my contact information will be available at the end. I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with individuals, and I'm also willing to give presentations at organizations via virtually or in person. I love to come out and talk. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Ken. So we will transition now to Will, who will share with us the participants' perspective and community advisory board chair.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to thank you all for coming and let you know how, like myself, people living with HIV can be trailblazers, because that's what I consider myself, is a trailblazer, because as people have gone before me, if it wasn't for them, we would still be taking over 100 pills a day. Most of us take one pill a day now, which is a fabulous thing. So keep in mind, keep an open mind that what I'm looking for those of us who are living with HIV, be open to participate in trials, and also don't listen to the myths, ask questions, and then they can be answered. You make your own decision. Don't go by the past, let's go by the present. We can do the next slide, please. This is our community engagement board. These are pictures of my colleagues who are on the first two rows, are voting members of our board, our CAB. And on the bottom row, these are our investigators and support staff and professors who help guide our study. Next slide. These are things that we are currently working on. There's game changers. That is what we strive to do. We strive to change the game, how things are done, by bringing people such as myself. Instead of inviting them as an afterthought, they bring us to the table to help make decisions and to include people living with HIV. The BEAT Martin Delaney Collaboratory, we're in the forefront of that, in my opinion, because we use people who are living with HIV in every aspect of what we are doing. We ask the questions, we solve the questions, and we reach out to others, for participation. The art of ATI, for me personally, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me since being diagnosed over 22 years ago. This interruption has me feeling better than I have in years. I feel like I did pre-diagnosis, pre not knowing what was going on with my body, but I now know. And also, I'm going to linger here just for a second. If you ever want to feel like you're the president of a country where you have that one-on-one ultimate staff of your personal physicians and researchers, people looking at you, this is what you should try to do if you qualify for doing it, because my doctors get weekly things, weekly blood work. I get to speak to other people, and I know what's going on me every single solitary week. And any question you may have when you go in to see Ken, they're answered. And also, top 10 things to think about before doing a study for the cure. For me, it was I wanted to do something for the community. I wanted to be, in the forefront of everything, to speak with people to who are dreamers, which are our scientists and our doctors. And I ask you all, don't stop dreaming. Keep dreaming. Your dreams are causing me to live and to and when it's my time to go, I'll die of natural causes, not because of my medical disorder that I have. So don't stop. That's my number one thing for me. And I also invite you to check out our HIV Cure educational videos. And if you go to BEAT-HIV.com, you can see them. These videos, these 4 videos are awesome. And they all feature people who are living, thriving, not just existing with HIV. Our Beat HIV community engagement group, these are some former members that you see here on the right. Fabulous workers, my predecessors, some of my current co-workers that I work with on the CAB. Check us out, ask questions, put it in the Q&A box, and we will answer them. The next slide, please. My favorite group as being a participant and chair of the CAB is a social science working group. I personally have been sitting on this particular team coming up on a year now. What this group does is try to find different ways to attaching to people who are involved in the ATI use and cure-directed research. We ask the questions. We also answer the questions respectfully, and also we challenge one another. So we also encourage others, our people who sit on our social science working group, to reach out to others, to let them know about different studies that are going on. And it really, really helps a lot when you have people who actually are the number one authority on how to do this, because no matter what the scientists come up with, remember, they don't take the medicine. We do. So if you want to have an opinion, find out about it, volunteer your time and your energy. Is a game changer for people who are living and thriving with HIV. The social sciences helps us to consider different aspects of it, and it opens your eyes to see that, maybe taking the medicine a different way, or asking people, how this works. We also are working with women in the cure-directed clinical research, which is major, because men and women are different, as we all know. So having that voice is a great thing. We go over Bill of Rights, responsibilities, participants, study, studies from the staff, and we make sure that you understand what is going on. And there's a glossary. So once again, I'm going to ask you to check out the BEAT-HIV.org so you can answer this and you can upload this and also download a question. Next slide, please. Ta-da, that's me. I am, as I said, an HIV positive man who happens to be, as you've seen in the previous slide, an amputee. But what this particular group in conjunction with Philadelphia Fight has given me back my life. HIV, I'm going to say, has given me life and it has saved my life. And that's why I'm saying giving me life. So no matter what you have, or it's not, I don't consider myself having a disability. I don't consider myself having a disease. I have a medical disorder. Yes, I do. But through research and people who support you, because I, to be honest, started to back out. And then my sister, one of my support systems, said, how can you ask other people to, to come up with ideas or ask them to participate in a study? You're not even going to do it. So I now thankful that that did happen. And I am participant. I am an active participant in this study, thriving and enjoying every minute of it. Next slide.
So thank you, Will, for that insight and those comments. So this concludes all our 4 information input sessions. So we're now going to shift into questions and answers. So I would encourage everyone to use the question and answer box in order for us to address questions as they come in. I know some of you have expressed some comments, and there was also, I think Pablo responded to one of the questions that was raised with respect to the answer. So I'm not sure if there's any other questions that people may have. Here we go. I'm monitoring the question and answer feature.
Louise, can I make a comment?
Please, go ahead.
I would like to challenge everyone who is listening to my voice to encourage people who are living with HIV to participate, to join community advisory boards, because the more that you know, and check out Philadelphia Fight, because 4 years ago, I didn't have a strong background, but I sat in their classrooms and teach outside. I learned a lot. So people who were once my teachers are now my colleagues, and anybody knows me, that's where I got my degree from, Philadelphia Fight. If you want to know how to be treated, how to treat yourself, how to love yourself, how to get involved with all these fabulous people and to sit at the table or actually help prepare the meal, this is the thing for you. So I'm encouraging everybody to encourage one another.
Thank you, Will. So I think I don't see any other questions being raised. So I'm not sure whether there's no questions or people are finding it difficult to use the chat feature.
The chat is disabled, but you can ask all your questions in the Q&A box, guys, at the bottom of their screen.
There's a question about outliers in the most recent samples.
Please go ahead, Pablo. I can't.
Yeah, I mean, there is always outliers. There is one participant in the gene therapy study that decided to continue the treatment interruption because his viral load didn't rebound that much, and has been off therapy for a while, although recently he has restarted therapy when the viral load went up a little bit. I think so far the results from the combination of BNAbs and interferon, everybody's an outlier as far as I'm concerned, because we have maintained suppression, people have maintained suppression in the presence of the antibodies. For most of the people have maintained suppression. The study has not been analyzed completely, but what we have learned so far is that by giving the antibodies in combination with interferon, while those interventions are present, people don't rebound. So that's an important study, an important result. There is another question about the London patient, Adam Castillejo. Is his treatment reproducible? So I don't know.
This is the bone marrow.
Yeah,
transplant.
this is a patient very similar to the Berlin patient. He's a patient that had a hematological malignancy, a leukemia, and the patient, or a lymphoma. I think this was a Hodgkin lymphoma. The patient needed a bone marrow transplant because had failed the regular treatments. And it happened to be that they found a donor for the bone marrow that was Delta 32 homozygous. So that those donors don't have the co-receptor that the HIV virus uses to enter the cell. And he was transplanted with that. And as it happened with the Berlin patient, they stopped therapy and the virus has no rebound. And they cannot find the virus when they look very carefully for the presence of the virus, using very different technologies to collect many cells, to do rectal biopsies, to do spinal taps. So they have not been able to collect the virus. As far as I know, he's doing well. Unfortunately, Timothy Brown, the Berlin patient, passed recently last year because he had a relapse of the leukemia, not a relapse of the HIV. He had a relapse of the leukemia that he had before, and he died because of that.
I mean, one comment is that these approaches, both the Berlin patient and the London patient, require a bone marrow ablation, meaning that they have to get rid of your immune system in order to give you the new one. And that in itself carries a risk of mortality. So it would not be something that you would do unless you did not have an underlying cancer condition, because there is a higher mortality rate from that procedure than you staying on antiretroviral therapy alone. So that's why we can learn from these individuals, but we cannot really take that strategy for broad-based use, because obviously people have the alternative, which is staying on antiretroviral therapy, which has less risk inherently.
There is a question about somebody that is HIV positive that is taking therapy, started with a CD4 count of 450 and now is 750 and is interested in participating in the study. I think Ken is available to talk with you, and we can screen you for this study or other studies that might interest you. And I think there is a link at the end of the presentation if you are interested in being referred and participating in this kind of research.
Yeah, I in the chat section, I left my contact information. I'm happy to have one-on-ones as well as go out to groups to talk. But participating in trials would mean that you're somewhat local. I think that one person may be checking in from the Philippines, and certainly you can't do something as aggressive like this and not be local to the team. So, but I'm happy to speak with anyone.
Yeah, if you live in the Philippines, unless you have a private plane, it's going to be difficult to come here every week. Unfortunately, we will be happy to go there every week. Just kidding. But yeah. When this research extend to people struggling with comorbidities, I think having a functional cure for people living with HIV will benefit people also living with HIV and other comorbidities, because it will at least simplify the medications that people have to take. We have a lot of interest in studying better ways to manage the comorbidities of people living with HIV. Is not part of this seminar, but we have studies that are looking at some of the comorbidities that we are seeing with HIV treatment, like diabetes or obesity now is a big issue, particularly among African-American women. Obesity after starting antiretroviral therapy, and we're evaluating different approaches to try to prevent that complication that is associated later on with diabetes. So I hope I'm answering that question.
I'm happy to take one of the questions, which is talking about eligibility for these type of trials. One had a CD4 in the current CD4 of 229, but currently undetectable. Now you'll reference that we spoke about safety being number one on this. And for the reason of safety, your 229 CD4 would fall below the required 450 or greater at start of the study. And it just means that it's too risky for you to go off of your meds because you don't have enough of a buffer of your CD4 to protect your body, because we already intend that your CD4 will slowly drop while on the study. It will rebound, but in your particular case, you're already too close to the 200. And so your best case would be act as our cheerleader and talk from the sidelines, inform others at community events and things like that. But unfortunately, being an active participant would be too risky for you as an individual.
For that particular study, there are other studies that you would qualify. So for cure strategies might not, but for switch studies, like can you maintain suppression with combination of BNAbs, you will be eligible, because in that study, we are using antibodies as a way to maintain suppression. So you are never off medication, really. Because of your CD4 count is relatively low. I mean, it's okay, but a little bit low. We don't think it's safe to participate in an ATI study, a study that stops therapy. But it might be safe to switch your medication for a different medication, or switch your medication for an injectable that you will have only to get the injectable once a month or once every 3 months, and in the future, once every 6 months. So you can call, and there is almost always a study that people can participate and they can contribute, and there are important questions.
And also with in conjunction with Dr. Tebas is saying that if you contact us or myself, I am a recruiter for the University of Pennsylvania, and as Ken and Dr. Tebas was saying, just because you may not qualify for a study at this moment does not mean maybe 6 months later you revisit and ask to see if you would meet the qualifications. Never stop dreaming and never stop giving up. This is just at this one particular time you may not qualify for this, but there's plenty of studies out there that are available to people, and we're willing to help you to match you up.
And I just want to clarify, I mentioned like diabetes or hypertension in the eligibility discussion earlier. When I raised these, I meant to say these are uncontrolled conditions. If you're under care and your blood pressure is under control, or you're under care and your diabetes is under control, they would not be exclusionary. But if they're out of control, then our recommendation would be to focus on these important medical issues, get them in control, and then come back and be considered.
you know what else is good about participating in the studies? Because it's happened to me. I'm pretty compliant with seeing my infectious disease specialist, but he was amazed by the results I have been getting, and he actually called his practice partners in. So I got a chance to speak to all the doctors in his practice and answer questions for them. So just remember, before you do this, to speak with your doctor what your intentions might be, and have a heart-to-heart honest conversation with your medical team and your prospective new medical team, because they work as one. And remember, you are the coach, so you call the shots. So you have to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. But if you ask a question, don't be afraid of the answer either.
So there's a question about how to find out what trials are available for people to consider. So their BEAT-HIV program has a website, beat-hiv.org, in which at least the two trials that were discussed today are described. And Pablo, where are the ACTG trials listed?
The ACTG trials, we have a website, and also we're going to put a newsletter, and I think we're going to start capturing, and maybe we'll do a cross-link with the BEAT so we can refer to each other, and that are currently open at the University of Pennsylvania.
I think that the main purpose is, people on this call are here in your community in Philadelphia if you're local. So reach out to Ken or to Will or to Pablo or myself, and we can direct you to opportunities as they become available. So part of the reason of this webinar is to communicate what's happening. So if you're attending this webinar, then you are now introduced to individuals that can provide additional information. So so if you have an interest, reach out for that. And
I would add here that if a trial may be a little overwhelming for you, you've never done research before, there is a way to dip your toe in the water, per se, of research. These would involve like a one-time specimen donation. So scientists are often working in the labs, coming up with ideas, and they need specimens in order to prove out a concept. And so they often ask me for individuals in varying situations, undetectable folks, people with detectable viral loads, and so forth. And so there are ways to participate where it may be a one-day event, and you would be helping in various ways. So if you just want to get on our radar to be able to potentially be considered for something as crucial as that, but not as intense as a trial, please reach out.
And also, this helps demystify that scientists and researchers, as you clearly see, don't have a personality. They're scared to engage with us. But as you see right here, these people I work with they're out there for you, and they reach out. So ask those questions, demystify those things, get rid of stigmatism on research. We need your help to do that, and we definitely need participants in order to move to fight for the cure. So please participate and help them.
And I failed to mention also, we have psychosocial projects going as well. We have one-on-one phone conversations where questions in order to gauge the community's interest in ideas, as well as focus groups that we're putting together. So if you are interested in those type of things, well, reach out and I'll make sure you get in touch with the right folks.
Yeah, we're just about to launch a national survey on the use of the in-home viral load devices that is going to survey people's opinions about this strategy for monitoring viral load. So if you're interested to be part of that national survey that we're going to launch, also reach out, and we can sort of keep you in the loop of when the survey will be launched. So there is opportunity for everyone on this call to even participate in that, because that's going to be an open call for input on how usable or interest or concerns come up when you learn that there may be a way to monitor your viral load through an in-home device. So again, as Ken said, there are multiple opportunities to contribute, going all the way from answering a survey to providing a one-time sample or engaging in a full clinical trial.
Can I show them the actual size of that? I think that would help demystify things. So I know seeing the slide, but I would like to show it. Because as I said,
Will is referring to the in-home device that we're testing for viral load measurements. That basically you take home, you use it after the shower or whenever, and then you send it to the lab directly.
Ta-da, this is it. It sticks to your arm. It only takes 6 minutes to do. You clean your arm, you pull this off, which is a cap. That is your little device that draws the blood from you, and it fills in these little chambers. The only part that you have to do is set a timer. And when it's done, you just pull it off, wipe your arm down to keep everything clean, stick the Band-Aid on, and remember to pull off the strip so it can dry, so the blood work can dry. And it's as simple as taking it to a FedEx or Walgreens or something like that. But participate. It's not hard. It's not heavy. It's much gentler for those of us who, well, I'm a former diabetic. It doesn't even feel like that when you get raw from your finger sticking. Participate, participate, participate.
And this is an example of how studies provide multiple answers, because as Pablo described, we have phases of the trial that are testing, can we achieve suppression or control? And obviously, if we can achieve that, that would be an amazing success. But there may be some individuals that their virus may return. Now, for those individuals, this study on the viral load device will then capture how efficient can this device be in capturing the decline of virus once they go back on antiretroviral therapy, even sending it from home. So this is an example where, whatever happens in the study, whether you suppress or you don't suppress, you're going to be able to contribute an important answer. So, and that's why the participants in these trials really provide an amazing amount of information that is used in many ways by the team. So I think we're coming up to the end. So I just want to thank everyone.
I wanted to add one quick thing, that in the comments section, we put the FIGHT Research Department's phone number. So if you are a FIGHT person and you are listening and you have interest in clinical trial, you would call that number, 215-529-8695. And that would get you directly to Lyndon, who is the director of research there at Philadelphia FIGHT.
Okay, so it's on the question and answer as well. So again, at FIGHT, you can contact Lyndon at 215-525-8695, or you can also contact Ken, who provided his number, 215-662-8217, or you can check the website, or you can reach out to Will Carter as well. So there are multiple opportunities. But anyway, thank you all for your time and joining this webinar. Thank you to Will, Ken, and Pablo for your insights, and Beth for handling the presentation. And stay engaged. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining, and be sure to stay on, and you'll be prompted to complete a survey at the end of the webinar. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, presenters, for your time and sharing your expertise.